you. Yeah, let's share ours and make harmony. Yeah, I wanna be something good for you. So when you try to stop by, yeah, I want to do something good for you. And when you say do that, it's okay. I wanna be something good for you. And when you try, tears in my eyes, yeah, I want to do something good for you. And when you say do that, it's okay. Yeah, I wanna be something good for you. Yeah, I wanna be something good for you. Fantasy just as I see my king riding high above the waves, got his on the queen. Didn't try too hard, cause it ain't nothing. When the universe connects what it says to be. See his eyes be good and his soul be hood. This is the type of man that was us to him. Even with these feelings of one. Yeah, cause his mind is already within. So when you try to stop by, yeah, I want to do something good for you. And when you say do that, it's okay. Yeah, I wanna be something good for you. And when you try, tears in my eyes, yeah, I want to do something good for you. And when you say do that, it's okay. I wanna be something good for you. Yeah, I wanna be something good for you. Skin so auriferous, dipped in golden rays as the sun. God was meticulous, made you the one. Drenched in perfection, affection has come. The spark is ridiculous, our love made a bomb. A chemical reaction when I think of you. Elements and eloquence equivalent of two. Passions and presences collaborate our souls. Now we spell what our senses. Let's crack all of life's complexities. Come cause a little calamity with me. Yeah, I feel your aura cold to me. Yeah, all my inner thoughts are calming me. So when you try to stop by, yeah, I want to do something good for you. When you say do that, it's okay. Yeah, I wanna be something good for you. And when you try, tears in my eyes, yeah, I want to do something good for you. And when you say do that, it's okay. I wanna be something good for you. Yeah, I wanna be something good for you. I want to be something good for you.